So I decided to do Apollo 11 Kerbal, one of the older versions, because it runs better as best as possible, replicating everything down to the flight control surfaces, no solar panels, only um, fuel cells. I got the fins there at the bottom of the rocket as close to as possible from what I saw watching real launches. Um, it's got multiple launch escape modes, including modes that pull the capsule away with the launch escape rocket, and some after the tower's been jettisoned that continue into orbit or continue into a suborbital trajectory so I can land further downrange. I got a two-stage lander. It's 3 stages into orbit. The third stage performs the boost into orbit, and the TLI burn. SPS performs the lunar orbit insertion and the Earth orbit injection burns. Like I said, two-stage lander. It gets down. Really doesn't have hardly any fuel when it lands. And I have a bit too. I have a lot of fuel left over when I come back up on the ascent stage, which I'm thinking about fixing that. It just ended up how it worked out. They didn't have fuel tanks that were working quite right. I had to use 2 larger fuel tanks than I wanted to use. But as we launch, there's no roll program because it was giving me issues getting a launch azimuth down. There is a pitch program immediately. The Saturn V did pitch immediately after coming off the pad. Really, primarily to I think it was a 3-degree pitch to get it away from the tower in case it caught a gust of wind that blew it back over. And once again, I had a phone call there, one of the damn telemarketers. But we're coming off the pad here. It's a really slow acceleration on the first stage, which is actually quite ideal. I always have a problem launching bigger, craft. That'll run up on that aerodynamic drag and get that thing red hot going into orbit. But I accelerate so slowly here that it's actually quite boring. It's really easy to fly. I have struts running down the sides with some little small cubic octagonal struts that I've leaned over on their sides so they don't obtrude to give it rigidity, because it was really it was getting some nice oscillations when I tried to do it without that. But I made them as unobtrusive as possible to try to keep this looking as realistic as I could. It's I think it's about a 4-minute ride into orbit, not including the circularization burn. It's going to be an 85-kilometer, pretty equatorial orbit. I'm not really concerning myself with particular target landing sites, although with the extra fuel I have on the SPS, I could target anywhere really 30 to 40 degrees from the equator, anywhere on the moon. So that's about it. Coming in up here, I was really concerned at first that I wouldn't have enough thrust on the second stage, which was actually true, because I wanted to do it as so realistically that I actually had 5 small engines on the second stage, but I just didn't have that option. Unfortunately, we're coming up here probably about a quarter remaining on stage 1. But I was using those swivel engines and those Reliant engines, and a cluster of 5 of them, and it just really wasn't working out. I finally figured out how to do interstage fairings, which was really I should have learned that quite a long time ago. But that's how I was able to use or have this thing all the same dimension, even though the third stage is a skipper, one of the smaller, not 3.5-meter engines, with an interstage fairing around it. And how I was able to get the lunar module closed up there. I'm constantly checking my apogee and my altitude. I don't want to flip the rocket end over end. The launch escape system, as we stage here, is going to jettison moments after staging, just like it would have done on the real thing. I don't know if this would be a flight pitch attitude that would be to scale, but I was doing the best I could to get into a nice stable orbit. And here we have staging. S2 ignition. I used one of those bigger 3.5-meter engines. I can't remember what that one's called. I think it's like the Rhino or something. And there goes the escape tower. I still have it looking pretty realistic, barring the fact that that second stage is currently on one giant engine. And it worked really. It's really controllable through the entire flight. The controls are pretty sluggish on stage 1, but you want it that way. I have the gimbals down to like 25 or 10% on the engine gimbal limitation. because any more than that, and it was pitching around like an F-16. You know. This is my first Kerbal video. I am a commercially rated pilot in the real world. I'm working on my flight instructor rating here and should finish that soon. We're here coming through 33 kilometers, and this is probably my most. I like flying this stage a lot because we're really building the orbital velocity, and you do a lot of the heavier pitching. It's more of a and something you have to control actively versus stage 1 where, you know, I watch it and every so often I hit a couple buttons to get the pitch more in line with where I want it to. I'm really shooting to end stage 2 at about 70 kilometers, so I'm going to pitch here flat right about now. Because my goal is when I get my apogee up to 85 kilometers, I want to have almost a 30 kilometer periapsis. Just so I minimize my circularization burn, make it a bit more realistic. Because I know that the shuttle and the Apollo flights actually made it up. I believe only on one burn. They didn't. I know the Saturn V's, when they cut their S3 engine off the first time, they were in a stable 100-mile orbit, which they did for one orbit. I've admitted some of the scale things, like I don't do a one parking orbit because after I cut that third stage engine off, it's like 2 minutes until I have a good window. I allotted 840 meters per second delta V to get into a lunar trajectory. So I start off about a 1.2 million or 1.2 million meter lunar apogee. And from there, I initiate the burn about 30 seconds from apogee and burn it all the way down to an 18-kilometer orbit, so about 60,000 feet, which is actually about the altitude that the real lunar module started off at. Here we're getting ready to come up on staging on these S2. I'm coming through 60,000 feet. Like I said, this was a really fun one to fly. I got a little from oscillations here. There is connected and offset into the second stage fuel tank. An SAS module, which I don't think I could have done this without. There we have staging. You see the fairing, the interstage fairing falling away, and the skipper igniting. And if I hadn't attempted this, I've done this mission. This isn't the first test I've done of this. I've been working on this actually about a week now. Once I get into orbit, I really only have about half the fuel left on this second stage, which would normally concern me because I was always one of those guys who overbuilt my rockets with way too much delta V and just did horribly inefficient things to get to places like Jewel, and I really still do, but the moon's pretty easy. There's my apogee at 75 kilometers. But I actually end up with too much delta V. Phone's ringing again. That phone tends to ring about every 10 minutes here, which is pretty awful. But as I said, we're coming up into orbit. I end up having too much delta V too much fuel on the third stage, to the point where my first couple launches of this, just to be sure of everything, I would use that extra fuel for the lunar orbit insertion burn. I would do my transposition and docking. I would dock with the lunar module and just leave it still attached to the third stage. It's a really rigid attachment, more rigid than I would have liked. I wanted to do it with a docking port, but I realized that without a lot of struts and a decoupler, it just wasn't quite going to work. Because I was going to pogo oscillate, it would break in half, and that led to a couple fun scenarios where I did use my launch escape system modes in varying degrees until I got all the struts figured out the way I wanted them. I think the most fun one was where I cracked in half on the stage 2, and I fired stage 2's engine and dropped away the first stage, hoping to go suborbital and give myself a little time to work things out. But then as I pitched over a bit, I got more oscillations between the second stage and the third stage, and the lunar module started oscillating, in which case I just said screw it and fired the launch escape system, which I have set to action group number 2, action group number 2 fires or kills the second stage engine. No, it was action group 6, something like that. One of my action groups, it kills the second stage engine, fires the launch escape tower, and decouples the command module from the service module. And then I have later action groups to decouple the launch escape tower from the docking port on top of the command module. I've offset my parachutes so they all rest inside the command module, so it looks very clean. Although it gave me some fits, and I actually have some things that I don't quite know if they work or not. My fuel cells in the SPS are tied into an action group, but I'm not quite sure if they work or not because I can't manually activate and deactivate them. And if you use an action group, it doesn't tell you. And the command module or the service module doesn't use hardly any power. You know, I undock it from the lunar module, and it just free floats. It's not like it's sitting there, you know, drawing power to run the SAS. We're circularizing here now. We have it. No, we've already circularized, I guess. I was looking away for a bit, and we're getting ready for our TLI burn. 839.9 meters per second. And it came out really, really nice. I usually prefer to do this actually on the dark side of the Earth. That way I can do my transposition and docking, which is usually about a 30-second maneuver. I like to do that actually when I'm on the light side of the moon or of the Earth. But I had just enough time to do my TLI burn and get my transposition and docking done. You can see here that I have an antenna that would have been mounted about properly for an SPS. I never extended that antenna because I just spaced my mind. I have a 45-minute limit on screen recording, and I was just trying to get this done as quickly as possible. I only even get one of the astronauts out. But the purpose of this is a functionality thing. If I wanted to do a 2-scale thing, I'd be overlaying this not with my voice, but with Apollo ground transmissions. Now, this is all real time. I don't skip through anything here. I time accelerate, you know, all the time, of course, like we all do. Coming about halfway through the TLI burn there, I have about a third of my fuel left on this stage. And here we go again. And I'm back. I'm not even sure if this thing's... This is my first attempt at making a video with this software. I hope I'm not breaking myself up too bad. But yeah, like I said, we're coming through our TLI burn. We're almost finished. We still have a quarter of our fuel left. If I wanted just to remove fuel, I could get this a lot more efficient. Maybe not land, you know, with 3 or 4 seconds left of fuel on the descent stage. One of the things I really was concerned with coming into this, and as I disengage this, or I mean, disable all my RCS ports that I have on the command module, but when I go ahead and blow the fairing on the lunar module, I see these people with these like monstrosities of lunar modules that don't even look like they made an attempt to be halfway to realistic. I wanted to not do that. I wanted to make this as small as possible for 2 men, and you're going to see it here. Yeah, here we go. Disable my crossfeed. Out of habit, I do that because that caused me so many problems on my trips to Jewel. Docking is easily one of my favorite things in Kerbal Space Program. I don't know what I was thinking there. There we go. got the SAS turned off. I find that setting the docking ports as the targets, I can actually dock without looking. All I have to do is have that nav ball. It's like, as a pilot, that's like our version of an ILS. You cross the needles and follow it all the way to wherever you're going, usually a runway. Came up into this issue where if my relative motion was actually 0, it didn't give me an apogee or one of those flight path indicators, so I had to get some delta V built up. I had to get some speed built up before it gave me that back, which is really critical when I'm trying to do this without looking too much. And here we go, we're docked up very nicely. I usually try to dock with my hatch facing my command hatch facing my lunar module hatch, and this is about to size. If you notice, the lunar module is almost the size of, it's a bit wider, and it's almost the size of the command service module, which is pretty realistic. Yeah, of course there's no giant engine bell on the back of this because I only have that Poodle engine. Got that activated. Now we're just on a coaster here to the moon. Now you can see I have an earlier test. The ascent stage actually stays in orbit around the moon, and I go clean it up later. And by whenever I feel up to it, just firing those ascent engines and blowing myself to a billion bits in some sort of crater. When I'm doing all this and using maneuver nodes and stuff, I remember the early days of Kerbal when I would build these giant direct descent. And when I say direct descent, I mean literally point the rocket straight up and go. Rockets with, 30 or 40 solid rocket boosters all staged together, and they fall off like a starfish. And this would be to get a single capsule, a single-man capsule up to the moon. And if I was lucky, get them back. Now I've got space, or before I went and restarted, I had space stations in orbit. I've been to Jewel, Gilly, the little moons, the asteroids. I built like 400-meter long spacecraft in orbit, using different stages and sent them places, which is always, I always wonder why I do that. I actually hate doing that. When you've got 3 Nervas just firing for 15, 20 minutes, and you can try to hit these more tell. So I'm coming down to about an 18-kilometer orbit. To be as realistic as possible, and the lower you start your descent burn with the lunar module, the easier it is, the more fuel you save. Which, as I said, landing with maybe 4 seconds of fuel left, that's a pretty big concern for me. And that's actually using fairly efficient burns. I tried my best not to avoid the whole, burn, stop, wait a few minutes, burn, stop, wait a few minutes. And I stopped the engine a couple times. Usually, I think I only stopped the engine once on this one to find out. And that wasn't for very long. I just cut it off to let my vertical speed build up and my horizontal kill off in the SAS to realign me retrograde. Now this is always boring because it takes quite a minute to get that 1.2 million kilometer or million meter apogee down. I'm kind of anal about my orbits. I don't like to have orbits where the apogee and perigee are more than 500 meters apart. And I really prefer, within 200 meters, which causes the thing to go all wonky. But unless I have a really good reason to it, I've launched things into elliptical orbits for a reason, but that's not very often. I like circles. We don't bother wasting time in orbit, like I believe they did on the real Apollo missions. We get to a point where I can see outside, and thanks to no crew transferring through docking ports in this earlier version of Kerbal, EVA to the lunar module and start our descent pretty immediately. You're going to see here when I get in here and I undock and I use the RCS. The RCS on this on the lunar module is a little wonky. It just never wants to stabilize. It's constantly firing, and it becomes a concern when later on we got to dock the ascent. Even though it handles quite well, as long as you're not trying to do anything too precise. And you're also going to see my ugliest docking ever in this video. I can usually, nice, stop. You can dock at less than 0.01 meters per second. Set the control, undock. Back off with the RCS a little bit. This actually worked quite well. Yeah, it works a lot better when the descent stage is attached. You can see in the landing gear. And I'm going to begin a roll here. I'm going to read my staging a little bit. And I think this is the point where Armstrong called out, Houston, the Eagle has wings. You got a little Mike Collins in there making sure the landing gear's down. Now this is where the RCS goes weird for some reason. I'm going to push myself down below the command module, activate this engine, and get ready for descent. I've actually gotten pretty good at picking landing spots by eye. Yeah, it seems like the first 100 or so times I went to the moon, I always ended up on a 30-degree slope or on my side and having to find all sorts of weird ways to flip myself right side up. Or sometimes just firing the engine, hoping I could use the gimbal factor and blowing myself into the side of a rock or something. There's right where I'm planning on landing. I actually get pretty close. Yeah, I cut the engine twice in this, I believe. Once when I get on target, because I don't have the patience to figure out how little throttle I would need to use if I wanted to start the engine and not touch it until I was, I think 1 or 2 meters above the surface. I think the probes on the end of the lunar module legs were like a meter long. And for those of you who don't know, in the lunar module there was a light for contact, and there were these long rods that stuck off the foot pads of the lunar module, so you could tell when you were touched down. They look about a meter long, and when they would touch the surface, that contact light would illuminate, and you hear if you watch the footage, you'll hear Aldrin show contact shut down of the main descent engine. Using this single engine, it's kind of nerve-wracking because you don't know if you're gonna get all that velocity killed off. And like I said, I cut this once, but I ended up firing that engine by necessity until I'm about 10 or 15 meters above the surface. Like I said, I worked on this entire thing for about a week, maybe a little longer. I don't know what happened. I was pretty stupid. The first couple times I did this, I was like, yeah, I got it. And then I realized my Saturn V only had 2 stages, so I had to go back and fix that. Ended up being a very, very large Saturn 1B. Once again, still firing my engine here, coming through 5,000 meters. One of the things I don't like about this is that there's no way to switch from AGL, or from MSL to AGL in the altimeter. When I'm landing, AGL is way more valuable to me, unless I were to know the elevation of the terrain. When I'm landing on a runway, I have it's published. When I'm a pilot. When I fly the real things, it's published the elevation of the runway, so I know that if the elevation of the runway is 900 feet and I'm at 1100 feet MSL, I'm only 200 foot off the ground. And I have my my ladder extending here, and it's slanted so it doesn't impact the lander leg there, and I can crawl right down it. I wish there were a way to put leg or to put rungs on that lander leg, because that'd be really fun. Like I said, I'm not going to bother having both of them get out. This is just to show you that it's really easy and very possible to make a very realistic looking Apollo 11. And 4,803 meters is my as the altitude of the terrain. My fingers went nuts here. Woo! I think it's interesting that Armstrong set foot on the moon and said one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Aldrin said magnificent desolation. Pete Conrad said whoopee! Pete Conrad being the third man to walk on the moon. It sounds to me like, and when I go listen to the landing recordings, Conrad and Bean had the most fun landing. Their voices are just giddy and kind of up when they're coming down. They sound like they're just really having a lot of fun flying the lunar equivalent of an ILS with that surveyor probe that had a radio beacon on it. They landed within like 10 meters of exactly where they wanted to, which is outright impressive. I think coming on an ILS in the real world, 30 feet is pretty close to my margin of error if I'm right there at the antenna. I don't pay that much attention. I accidentally fired the descent stage, which, what little remaining fuel I had at first, before I remembered, oh yeah, I have to stage to get my ascent stage coming up. I have the target set to my command module. I'm trying to get the launch azimuth so I don't have to do as little of a maneuver node burn to get into the proper orbit. And usually I end up quite far away from the command module when I do this, and so I have to go to the space center and just wait it out, wait it out maybe a couple weeks. But I actually managed to get it right here. It's probably my favorite part of the mission. I haven't done this in a while, where I was at a position to dock after only 3/4 of it, or maybe one orbit. I'm shooting for a 19-kilometer orbit here, just so that surface module's gonna catch up to me. I wish there were a way to have one engine on this thing. That just didn't seem possible. Although that extra fuel might be worth attempting to put a. Well, no, I couldn't stick a Terrier, or whatever, the little tiny engine they use for the descent stage on it, because that'd be, one, way too much thrust, and two, if I get around somewhere where I show maybe I have previously showed the bottom of the ascent stage, it's asymmetrical. I mean, I've got two fuel tanks lined up, so it would block the attachment point. I did a lot of offsetting with this, and my first test actually went my first test after I had the final design went really great, until I came down, and I'll explain what happened there later. And here we go again. Yay, I actually had a phone call that amounted to something. And here we go again. So, I think I was burning fuel out of one tank, but not both at the same time. it actually made it really difficult to control. Especially coming into docking. It made it very squirrely. Which is kind of unfortunate because I've all accounts I've read were actually that the lunar module was a dream to fly because it was specifically designed for fine maneuvering close to the surface of the moon. In addition to its in-flight, lunar orbit rendezvous capabilities. Kind of try to play with it here so I don't end up asymmetrical or too much of an elliptical orbit. And on the 8th day, God invented time compression. There's a far cry from the Silent Hunter days when I was playing Silent Hunter, and during many periods, during attacks, I couldn't time compress for like 20 hours, and I couldn't pause. A 7.9 meter plane, or burn to match planes. You can see my closest approach are really close there. Okay, there we go. We're nice and close. What separation here was like 5,000 meters total. And there's 6,500 meters. I usually start my docking when I get to fly. I came really close to actually hitting that other test that I haven't gotten out of orbit yet, which is why I like to have usually pretty clean orbits, pretty clean planets. Get all the junk out of there. I think I came within like, I went back and looked, it came within like 2,000 meters of hitting it. I've had that happen before where coming back from the moon or some other planet, I slam into a space station on my way down, and that's always a real... You're not paying attention to that, you're just wanting to get home at that point. You're just time compressing. Next thing you know, you wiped out 15 Kerbals in one fell swoop, if not more. I think at one point I destroyed a space station entirely with like 30 Kerbals in it. May they rest in peace. Now, I always find my best way to dock is to kill off as much relative velocity as possible. So I go through and test all the different axes I can burn on and bring my velocity down as low as I can. This is all remarkably boring. And horribly frustrating when you get a spacecraft that's acting as squirrely as this ascent stage is. Not the worst I've ever been with, but certainly not the easiest or the most fun. My SPS is pretty much I call it the standard orbiter, and I have it saved as such, so I can just slap that on top of any booster configuration I want. I just wanted to go on a pause for something. It is remarkably, it flies like an F-86. Caveat, I've never actually flown an F-86. I've flown a T-6, and that's about the highest performance thing I've got my hands on. Unless you count a Piper Seneca and a Beechcraft Baron. And I got a little time in a citation. That's not the point. You can see my fuel configuration here. Nice clean shot of it, but I think it was burning out of that left big tank first and got pretty off center of gravity. And like I said, this is going to be the worst docking I've ever done. It's almost embarrassing how bad this went. I like to start my docking actually from below the spacecraft usually, but it just didn't work out that way this time when I did my launch. A nice, good view of the service modules. We're coming in within 50 meters. Kill off the remaining relative velocity. I want to come up from the side that I'm currently on. See my my engines are gimbling pretty furiously right here. Oh, maybe I didn't want to put off from that side. Whatever. This is where things get rough for me. My little the formula I use in my head is that I want 0.1 meters per second closure for every 10 meters. So if I'm going 100 meters, if I'm 100 meters out, I want a 1 meter per second rate of closure. Which means right here I really should have been at 0.2, but I was kind of in a hurry, running up against that 45-minute time limit. And I'm trying to get this sped up here, and this is where it, if. It was going way too fast to make this clean. Like I said, at this point I would have usually been at 0.1 meters per second. And boom, we're going to slam right into that docking port and hope we don't break anything. We're going to slam into it twice, maybe a third time. Bounce, bounce, bounce. And we're locked up. Get my guys transferred back into the command module and bid the lunar module adieu. Ugly little bastard is. I would love it if somebody would come out with an octagonal, or if Kerbal would come out with a stock octagonal descent or fuel tank in a square-ish, weird-shaped trapezoidal, so I can make it really realistic for the ascent stage. On dock, so long Eagle. Checking my relation to the Earth, I'm actually really happy with where I am to start my my burn home. So I just go ahead and go for it from here. You usually wait another orbit to get something more ideal, but this is about as ideal as I could come up with. As I mentioned, I never unfolded that antenna just because I wasn't quite thinking about it. Up we go. Burning prograde on the moon on this side is actually burning retrograde to Earth, so my periapsis is coming right down. It's quite. This is the way I like to do it instead of having to circle the Earth at once, which takes forever. I want to get my Kerbals back to their families as quickly as possible. Mrs. Armstrong is ready for her massive media tour before she divorces him. Coming in. And as I get closer, I start looking, and I'm trying to land in the water here. Even though the Kerbals have not given me any flotation devices, so the damn thing almost sinks. Getting closer, I realize it's not potentially going to happen, so I try to extend my my downrange reach here without raising my apogee. I just want to kind of rotate my orbit, the ellipse of the orbit around. I also try to dump this, or to get rid of this command or the service module with no fuel in it if possible. Here we go. Try to extend that, and it works pretty well. And by pretty well, I mean not at all. Get closer, and I realize, gee, if I change my if I change my eccentricity, I think that's what it's called, I can get right there in the center of the, looks like the Kerbal version of the Pacific Ocean. Throttling up, just gonna burn off all that remaining fuel, and now I'm pretty well certain I'm 100% sure I'm gonna drop right in the ocean, exactly where I want to be. Going for a swim today. I'm gonna go ahead and enable my RCS ports, so I have some decent control coming through the re-entry. I should have put some batteries in the command module. I oversight I didn't really think of. It works. Really just one those 100 unit batteries would have been great if I stuck that and slapped it to the heat shield and offset it inside. Here we go, disconnecting from the service module as we come through 70,000 meters, and we're now in the upper atmosphere. Try to save my monopropellant and my electricity as much as possible. Doesn't work too well. Now we're getting down below 45,000 meters, and we're really biting the atmosphere now, really kind of fighting against it to hold our attitude. Got the drogue sheet set to auto-deploy. The drogue sheets that you do not see because they're nicely tucked away. And watching my electric charge, for some reason I just don't like to land with that thing on zero. I give it like 1 or 2 units, and I'll cut it off and let it tumble out of control until it dies. Or, lands maybe. 12, 11, 10... Drogue sheet coming out at 26,000 feet. Survey, political survey. My dad is an elected official. I get about 1 of these calls a day, and they consider my responses invalid because my father is a county commissioner. Coming down, woo, the Kerbals are all, they're pretty hot in there right now, I'm sure. They just don't know what their air conditioning system works, but they're all pretty straight-faced. They're not scared or anything. And I'm time compressing because this is absolutely boring as hell. I'm literally not touching anything. Coming down. Nice and slow. I'm going to cut these drogue chutes because they cut the drogue chutes on the real Apollo missions. Drop for just a little bit before I pull the mains. And I wish I had 3 of them, but I opted to go with 1 parachute instead of 3 parachutes that all looked like they were basically stuck together because they stayed together, or stayed nice and far apart on the real Apollo missions. I don't know how they did that. But there's no way to do it here in Kerbal. They haven't given us one of those triple parachutes like they did in the early versions of KSP. The really early versions. And 100 meters splashdown. Look at that. It's beautiful. 30, 20, 10, and boom.